Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Dr. Stephen Dorsey. I am an executive leadership coach with the San Diego County Office of Ed, and I am joined by my fine colleague, Mr. Valentin Esconguela. And today we are going to be talking you through the distance learning instructional continuity document that was created for our African American student group. We will review this document in sections and also speak to some current considerations that we must take in response to the blended learning environment that has been created due to the COVID-19 pandemic that continues to evolve to this day. So let's get started. So the purpose of this entire document is really in response to the COVID closures that happened in March. And we wanted to make sure that we were creating a continuity plan that aligned with our learning continuity plans that we needed for our district LEAs, but also aligned it to our equity resource summary. So within this document, there are many vital pieces that are going to be important for us to consider as we go through these changes that continue to evolve and morph as we get more information and as we have more COVID response pieces, whether it's hybrid learning, blended learning, online learning, virtual learning, or even now we have some streaming learning that is continuing within the hybrid environment. So all of these components are going to be important as we go through with our African American students. So the first thing we want you to consider is that communication piece. Is where were we pre-pandemic? What factors did we look at as we were involved in developing all of these components that LEAs needed to roll out to their families? Communication is that sole important and underlying component that goes throughout our entire organization. And it's important for us to understand that this communication piece should be a two-way component. Did we have good communication before the pandemic? And right now, we want to make sure that that's being enhanced because really we need that information returned to us from our parents. We need to identify where they are within their process of the online, hybrid, or virtual learning continuum. So that communication, whether it be quantitative or qualitative, survey, chicks, however districts and LEAs go about gathering this important information is so valid. And really including the African American community groups in that communication piece is really going to be important. So as we look at the communication questions, Valentin, what do you think?
Well, I think it's important for us to really think about and consider during this time as we continue to move forward is why is an intentional and continuous focus on communication important, Steve? Like this intentionality behind how we communicate, what we communicate, and what we gather from communication is incredibly important.
Right, and as a school system, we are so used to just sending out that information and getting it to the needed populations. But now we really need that two-way communication. In this situation with COVID-19, we need as much information as we can gather to really support our students, to make sure that our students are being involved in their blended learning continuum, to make sure that they're attending their courses, that they are staying up on their work to really prevent any learning gap.
And as we think about our African American students and the harsh reality that COVID-19 has really had an impact on that community is, what can we learn from our students, families, and communities that can help us inform the kind of support system that we need to put in place within our schools?
Right, and many of our African American families are frontline workers, are so important to our daily operation of everything that we are doing. And making sure that we can communicate with them to make sure we keep their students up to par within their academic realm is so important. Knowing whether they're an office worker or a grocery store clerk or within the medical field, a doctor, really understanding where our families are is so important. And it provides so much comfort to the families to know that their kids are being looked after and cared for in that educational component, even though we are in a blended environment.
Absolutely. the more entry points we can create for our families, for our African-American families, to find out information about where they are, what are the challenges they're facing, the more our system can help support and create systems that really address the needs of our communities.
Right, making sure that we have mental health components, making sure that we have all of the pieces that are going to help, as this environment can exacerbate some trauma-induced processes, where we've had groups that have really been struggling, and especially with everything that is going on right now, not just only within COVID, but we have our social justice movement, we have the election, we have all of these components that can tend to add on top of everything. As we go through all of these, making sure our communication is there to really support our families, our communities, as they deal with all of these issues. So as we move on, this kind of segues us into that social emotional learning component. And really, this is an important piece, and it has been a driving force over the past couple years of LEAs to really try and find that social emotional component that is going to support our kids in their learning in that multi-tiered system of support. So looking at what aspects did we already have designed to support our African-American students, if we didn't have much, really diving in to try and figure out what can we do. We've provided you with plenty of resources here where you can start to identify some of those components, and really understanding that this social emotional component should not be an isolated event, should not be a solo standalone program. We want to make sure that within this continuity plan that we are embedding these components into everything that we do to really make this a fabric of support, and not just for our students, but also for the adults within our system. It is so important that we understand the stresses that teachers are going through, the vicarious trauma that can be associated with our young African-American community that are starting to struggle, whether someone has lost a job or actually lost an actual relative due to COVID-19, is going to be something that we really have to deal with. So as we start thinking about our current reality and everything that's going on, we want to make sure that we understand the identity of our students. We want to make sure that we have some responsive supports, and we want to be able to leverage our practices in support of those academics, Valentin.
Absolutely. It's important for us to really think about and consider the kind of professional learning that we have to provide staff in order, for one, for them to be able to take care of themselves, but two, for them to be able to take care of our students. And so that comes from integrating this SEL, this social emotional learning strategies into their daily instructional practice. And so that's work that requires professional learning. That's work that requires us leveraging existing systems of PLC, of professional learning as a whole group, to be able to understand and gain the skills necessary in order for us to create spaces that heal our students. And so, you know, we're not only in this pandemic, but we're also in the middle of a civil rights movement, you know, that a lot of our African-American students are experiencing. They're seeing these things on TV unfold. They're seeing these things in their communities unfold. And so it's important for us to consider that as we begin to engage our students in academics and really leveraging that social emotional component for them to improve and enhance their learning and how they see themselves within the curriculum.
Right, where we are actually utilizing those CASEL components, the 5 sections within the SEL world, and really bridging it into our academic world. So they are learning a self-awareness and social awareness component that can really help design and support our students in dealing with all of these aspects from the social justice component on, and really having those rich conversations and those safe and brave spaces for our students to come and know that they can share and open themselves up, and within the African-American community to really be honest with their presentation and be accepted in that voice. So as we move forward, we look at expanding our equity lens. And again, we have a plethora of components for you to go through and really look at and focus. But we are starting to look at that equity lens across continuum, from curriculum to consciousness to really responsive and equitable instruction. And it's going to be so important that we look at this culturally and linguistically responsive approach to really drive our educational system. As an LEA, are we making sure we are connecting with our African American community? Are we being an assets-based organization that is really validating and affirming our African American community with what they bring, the richness of their culture that comes to the classroom? And then we want to make sure, do we have the supports necessary for our teachers, for our staff, to make sure that we are responsive to the needs of our students, that we are identifying that they can see themselves within the literature, within components of the educational process? And are we considering our system as a whole when we want to make sure we are culturally proficient and meeting the needs of our students?
You bring up a good point, Steve, and that is idea of like, how do we gain cultural proficiency of our students? And in order for schools and for systems to be able to do that, it's important for them to consider, like, what are those existing structures that we are utilizing daily to ensure that we are giving students the opportunity to share with us what their experiences are, share with us about their cultures, share with us and learn about each other, so that we can then get a better sense of how we can then create curriculum, how we can create instructional practices that are really going to tie into the needs of our African American students, right? And so as we continue to move forward, is to really identify those structures, those instructional practices that provide those opportunities for students to be able to share about who they are and what they bring to the table.
You got it. And really just focusing that this is across our state, and really understanding. Here within San Diego County Office of Ed, we use the National Equity Project's Learning Bridge, which is focusing on identity, mindset, and skill set, and to create that equitable component across all of our learning systems. That's the support that our staff really needs to understand as we start to grow from this hybrid, from this blended, from virtual, and really the yo-yo that we have been in since the time of COVID in March, and really getting into the deep of that instruction. So as we move forward, we're going to look at this digital content component, because again, this is so important. That digital divide is a huge aspect for our African American community. Many have not been connected prior to this, and making sure that we bridge that gap is going to be so important. And having that content available to us is really key, whether it's an open educational resource or a purchased curriculum that we can go through. So we have a deep amount of information here for you that you can go through and access and start to really drive that focus. But again, we want to make sure that that is culturally responsive, that we are identifying some components that are going to be specific to our African American students to really engage them in this digital content delivery, and really jumpstart them into a place of serious learning. So as we look at these questions, are we adapting our content? And then how is that content reflected? Kind of like we talked about before, is can they see themselves within the instructional component?
Absolutely, and this is something that we've heard it ourselves from student voices here in San Diego County. Is they are asking for us to ensure that we are creating experiences where they are seeing themselves in a positive light within our instructional materials, within the curriculum, and on a daily basis. And so how are we ensuring that via distance learning, when we think about the connectedness of our students to our classroom, that connectedness stems from how connected and how valued they feel within that classroom. And if they're not seeing themselves within the curriculum, if they're not seeing themselves or seeing the learning as beneficial or representative of who they are, then the connection is just not going to be there. And so the students have shared from their voices and saying, we want to see ourselves within the instructional curriculum. And so we have a responsibility. We have to take action in order for us to be able to make this happen for our students, especially right now with them being away from schools and making that connection that more meaningful.
Right, and it's really important as we've communicated with several districts across the state in looking at how the relationship is within their communities with their African-American students, where we have had a huge drop-off of actual school attendance. We are having a huge concern with our D&F rate for our students. And really, this is a component that we have to address equitably as we are going forward, making sure that our kids can see a relationship to their learning, to really keep them engaged and entrenched within that classroom, no matter what system you are in right now, whether it's hybrid, online, or blended. And not forgetting that we have special populations that need special attention within the African-American community, whether it's the BIPOC community or even the students with disabilities. As we go through, we really need to make sure that we are hitting the needs of all. So as we get into our final section, we're going to start talking about that digital device, the non-tech option, and our community partners, always so important within our African-American community. And making sure, again, that we have bridged that digital divide. It was already there, and it could have been exacerbated due to COVID-19. What steps have we taken to really address that? I am so impressed with our superintendent at San Diego County Office of Ed, Dr. Paul Gothold, and his work with Cox Cable to really ensure that he is getting our kids connected and not leaving any kids out there straggling, and really pushing that envelope to get the support we need to really connect our kids. Again, that's that community piece that we go through. But we also have to take into consideration that non-tech option. And have we created components that are going to support our students if they are not currently connected, or if the connectivity piece is not something that they are familiar with or ready to deal with? We have to be able to meet the needs of our students where they are. Again, that's that equity component, giving our kids what they need when they need it to be successful academically and socially as we go forward. So as we look at these last questions, again, how are we making it equitable with tech, without? What's transferable in our blended environment? Thinking long-term. We're not sure how long we are going to be in this situation. It can change from month to month. So being prepared and thinking long-term is so important. And then how are we going to connect and utilize our community groups that are all around us?
Yeah, and one, you brought up a good point when we think about the regional diversity of the state and those rural areas, the places where kids may not have connectivity, right? Those students are still deserving of an equitable education and equitable access to the curriculum. So in thinking about curriculum, how we're developing curriculum, how is that going to be transferable in a blended learning environment? So whether you're on tech or you're not on tech, whether you're at school site or you're not on the school site, how are we ensuring that every single student in our system has equitable access to learning on a daily basis? And so that's been a challenge. We know that here in San Diego County, we definitely have seen how certain spaces or certain regional areas of this county have limited access for some of our students that are living, in rural communities. And so as we look at our state and the diversity of our state, it's important to take that into consideration.
Such a great point, Valentine, such a great point. And really diving in to find out what community partners do we have around us? Do we have a local NAACP chapter that we can dive into? Is there an African-American organization that is nearby that can help support and bridge gaps to fill holes within our cultural awareness piece that we may need to give to some of our teachers? If we don't have the diversity within our staff to meet the needs of those students, it's, again, important to build those community partnerships with our African-American community to bridge that gap and really fill those holes. And again, we're thinking long-term with this, not just here and now, but blended, back in school, back in class, as vaccines come out and start to change the way we are going to be addressing things. It's going to be important that we think of all of these components as we build through. That is the end of our presentation. Again, this is just our resource page. We have this for you. If at any time you need anything, or we are here for support, this learning continuity plan for African American students is there for you, but we are always able to answer questions. If you need, feel free to contact us. This is our San Diego County Office of Ed Equity Department link. Use it at any time. We hope you enjoyed this presentation. Valentin, I thank you so much for joining me on this. Have a great day, everyone.